So that now we know the two different theories that help the microbiologist or scientist to go forward or to go deeper in the field of the origin of microorganism or microbiology. So the first theory was biogenesis theory that claims that life arises from a pre-existing cell. That means a living thing should be or must be originated from another living thing or living being. And another theory opposite to biogenesis, which is also called abiogenesis theory, explain the origin of life from a non-living things. Now let's see which one is correct and which one is not. So, debate over spontaneous generation theory. What is the origin of these animalcules or microbes? Until the second half of the 19th century, many scientists believed that some forms of life can arise spontaneously from non-living matters. This theory is known as spontaneous generation theory. So, until the second half of 19th century, that means from before 1950, people believed that all living things arise from a non-living matter, such as either wooden particles, stones, or any other non-living particles. So evidence and counter evidence regarding this. Francesco Redi, a scientist who was a strong opponent of this spontaneous generation theory. So the first opponent of this spontaneous generation theory was Francesco Redi. He claimed that this theory is totally wrong, and he also proved it with an experiment. And the experiment is very simple. Now let's see what is it. Well, he demonstrated maggots. Well, maggots are some kind of fruit fly or a kind of insect, all right, smaller insect which used to lay their eggs on different surfaces, like in food surfaces, soil surface, or other some kind of liquid surfaces. So maggots are generally a kind of insect. So he demonstrated that maggots did not arise spontaneously from decaying meat. From a decaying meat or rotten meat, people used to believe that from this rotten meat maggots arises spontaneously, and they believe this from their knowledge of spontaneous generation theory. So what he did, he filled 2 jars with decaying meat, first left unsealed, and flies laid their eggs on the meat, and the eggs developed into larvae. So it's very, very simple. He took 2 jars and filled both of them with decaying meats. Among the 2 jars, he covered one and left the other one uncovered, and uncovered, flies laid their egg on the meat, and gradually the eggs finally turns out to be a living maggots. And the other, which was sealed, flies cannot lay their eggs on it, so no maggots appear. So the experiment is very much simple. Then one opponent come to oppose the experiment or the claim of Francesco Redi. What he said, the opponent claimed that the opponent said that it was fresh air that should be present in the decaying meat in order to generate the maggots. They thought that fresh air can be used as a source of energy in order to produce the maggots from the decaying meat, which is a totally non-living thing. So against this claim, Redi set up another experiment. So he covered the second jar with fine net. Rather than keeping the jar open or unsealed, he covered it with a fine net where the air can present, but the maggots cannot lay their egg. The net is in such quality where enough air can pass, but it is not enough. But it does not contain enough pores in order to let the maggots to lay their eggs in it. So he covered the second jar with fine net instead of sealing it. So air was present, but no maggots appeared. So it was proved that maggots appeared when flies were able to lay their eggs on the decaying meat. Finally, he proved that when flies were able to lay their egg on the decaying meat, whether it is unsealed or covered with a net, only then live maggots will appear. Otherwise, no. Then, John Needham, another scientist, a far hardcore believer of spontaneous generation theory. He found that even after he heated nutrient broth or nutrient fluids, which is chicken broth or corn broth, before pouring them into covered flask, the cooled solution were soon teemed with microorganisms. claimed microorganisms spontaneously arose from fluid. So what did John Needham do? He found that when he heated a nutrient broth, that is a chicken stock, we know that chicken stock or corn stock, and then poured them in a covered flask. All right, the cool solution, before pouring them into covered flask, with a cool solution were soon teemed with microorganisms. What does it mean? It means that he first heated or boiled the nutrient solution, then let it cool down. Right, let it cool down, and then he wanted to transfer it to a covered flask, but before he can transfer it to the covered flask, all the liquid solution were teemed with microorganism, were full of living microorganism. So by this he came that the microorganisms spontaneously arose from fluid. Then another scientist appeared. So please keep in track that there are several number of scientists who work or who showed their opinion regarding these two theories. At first we saw that Francesco Redi, who was a strong opponent of spontaneous generation theory, come up with an experiment, and then an opponent claimed that fresh air was needed, so he set up another experiment. And now we saw that just now we saw that John Needham was a believer of spontaneous generation theory. And now another scientist with Lazzaro Spallanzani, he is also a non-believer of spontaneous generation theory. He suggested microorganisms from air probably entered into the Needham solution. His idea or his vision was totally clear. Like he said that from air, the maggots or the egg of maggots can be entered into the liquid broth, and from which all the new maggots were appeared. He showed nutrient fluids heated after being sealed in a flask did not develop microbial growth. How he showed it? He then put some nutrient fluid in a flask or a covered flask, sealed the covered flask, and then put it for boiling it. And he saw that, or he showed that after boiling there will not be any microbial growth in the covered flask. So Needham responded by claiming that, so after this experiment, Needham responded by claiming that vital force, that means air, was not present there. The basic difference between the believer of spontaneous generation theory and the non-believer is that the non-believer thought that air is a vital force that will help to grow a living particle from a non-living thing. But the non-believer of spontaneous generation theory, he said that air is required as a source of microorganism, not as a vital force. All right. Again, the vital force got more credence when Anthony Lavoisier showed the importance of oxygen to life. Spallanzani's observations was criticized by ground that there was not enough oxygen in the sealed flask to support the microbial life. At the same time, another scientist, Lavoisier, was recognized to discover the necessity of oxygen in order to survive in this world. That means oxygen, that means we breathe in oxygen. This was claimed by Lazzaro Spallanzani, and for this claim they can relate it with the spontaneous generation theory, that yes, air can be a vital force in order to generate or help to generate a microorganism from a non-living thing. That is why no one believed the experiment of Lazzaro Spallanzani, and it was grounded by the scientist Rudolf Virchow. So he first challenged spontaneous generation theory with the theory of biogenesis, which is living cells arise from pre-existing living cells. And finally, Louis Pasteur experimentally established the biogenesis theory. What he did? He demonstrated microorganisms present in the air can contaminate sterile solution. You know what is a sterile solution? A solution without any kind of microbial growth, or which is totally decontaminated. But the air itself cannot create microbes. All right. He filled several short-necked flasks with beef broth. Let's see the experiment here. So it is a short-necked flask which is filled with beef broth. All right, beef broth, and they heated it and then let it cool. Flask left open, and both these experiments were done in an open flask, and then waited to go the microbes. In the next step, what he did, the broths were heated similarly, and the flask was sealed when it was let for cooling down. All right, when it was left for cooling down, the flask was totally sealed, so no microorganism from air can enter to the flask. Rather, he waited for some times and found no microbial growth here. Further, what he did, he opened the flask and let it be as a open mouth flask. So when the flask was uncovered, after some time or after some day, he saw the microbial growth. So it is clear that it is the microorganism that come from the air to the broth, and then it can be seen within the broth. It is not the broth which helped to grow the microorganism. Finally, the spontaneous generation theory was removed from microbiological society or microbiological history, and the biogenesis theory was claimed.